And we're on. Hey, how's everybody going? Happy Sunday. Yeah, Earl Grey tea this morning. I've had just enough caffeine to ramble for about an hour. So let's chat about some stuff. I'll go over to the chat on the YouTube. Check out if anyone's commenting there. And just say a quick hello to some people on the IG. So g'day Cause, Be the Bees, Gumby, M. St. Clair, and Diamond Dabs. Thanks for joining us this morning. Looks like the feed's a little bit behind on Instagram. Hopefully it doesn't boot us off this week. And Dank Panda from Canada. I was about to say Canada, but he's Canadian from Canada. So it's the usual. If you have questions, comment in the various different areas and we will try and aggregate those over on the Discord, all that sort of stuff. And yeah, if there isn't anything sort of scheduled or pressing from people, I'll try and go over some stuff that's been on my mind or things that have come up through the week. And yeah, Be the Bees, it is a bit like that. Sunday sessions, it's sort of like, you know, soil Sabbath, something like that. It's been really, really, really hot here. So I've got air conditioning and fans running. I hope it's not destroying the sound quality too much. But otherwise I'd be cooking in here with all these lights on and whatever. There's a few other people who joined. Rhinosaurus, Matthew Taylor, Jamie, nice to see you, brother. And Burn City, nice to see you too. Mad shout outs to everybody who's joined. Yeah, so I think they said it's going to get to around 38 degrees here today. So that'll be interesting. There we go. Cool. So yeah, with that, I figured I would bring up mulching. I know some people don't like to mulch and have strong feelings about mulch or prefer to cover crop. But I'm a mulch advocate. I'm pro-mulch. So yeah, it's in this sort of weather when your plants are already suffering with, you know, there's huge amounts of evaporation when the humidity is around, you know, 30% or lower. Sometimes it can be desert levels depending on your area. Without that, it's really difficult to keep up with watering demands. So it's crucial outside, definitely. Not only for water conservation, but just for the general health of your plants, because if you're getting super hot sun blasting on your soil, it's really not good for your soil health. And you sort of, you know, your surface feeder roots aren't going to be enjoying that very much. So definitely outside, it's something that you should be doing. I mean, even if you're in a colder climate, it's still something you should be doing. But yeah, in summertime, outdoors, 100%. Indoors, some people, you know, don't sort of follow it as much, but it is still something that's really, I think, important for soil health. but also just important for keeping the soil functioning really, really well. So while the fact that it stays more moist might encourage a little bit more gnat activity and things like that, the trade-off is usually a much more healthy and functioning soil. And as we've kind of spoken about before, gnats and things like that, unless they're at plague proportions, are probably not something to worry too much about in a living organic soil anyway. And yeah, some people there in the comments saying that it has been pretty crazy heat-wise. The strange thing about the video at the moment is that I'm still seeing the on-air thing, so I'll just close that and reopen it. Oh. There in the comments. Technical difficulties. One day I'll learn how to use this stuff properly, and then you'll all be in trouble. Be the bees, about a 5 centimeter layer. Yeah, you can even go a little bit thicker if you like. So I go about 1 inch, 2 inches. Outside, you might go, 4 or 5 inches if you've got an area that's especially hot. The point of the matter is just cover your topsoil with something. Not only does it make it easier to water, you're breaking up the water before it hits anything like that. It makes your top dressings work better. The idea of keeping your soil evenly moist so it's not suffering huge swings in, moisture levels. So it's not way, way, way too wet or way, way, way too dry. You want even moisture? What's going to facilitate that is a good mulch layer. Add to that most mulches break down, especially a lot of the good ones, even if it's gradually, and that adds carbon to your soil. And even just that continual breakdown, you're feeding the whole soil microflora. So yeah, it's good to use. There's a variety of different things you can use. People use rice hulls. People use, like I've been experimenting with peanut shell, like crushed peanut shell. We have a pretty cool mulch that's made with alfalfa and hemp stalk and things like that. So yeah, pick something that is good and clean, if possible, not full of a whole bunch of pest eggs and weird stuff like that. So kind of watch what you pick up. But yeah, basically just the idea is to cover your soil. And then you can kind of get into more specifics if you want to have, a more premium mulch, I guess. Grows Clover. Nice to see you. Jaden. Yeah, be the bees in backyard in full sun. Yeah, don't be scared. Go 2, 3 inches, 4 inches. You'll do fine. Don't oversaturate your plants, obviously, and don't mound. That's kind of something I probably should say is don't mound up mulches that are prone to heavy breakdown right around your stems. Some stuff you can kind of get away with it a little bit, like if it's a looser, coarser mulch, something like wood chip, that doesn't seem to have as drastic effect as putting something like, say, pure alfalfa up against the stem. You can get rot that way. So keep your main stem clear. But yeah, kind of feel free to get that soil covered. And you'll notice how much of a difference it makes. Like even on a really hot day, you'll water, say early in the morning, and you'll check it in the evening, and there'll still be a lot of moisture retained. Look, outdoors in this sort of weather in pots, it's really hard to overwater, be the bees. What you'll notice firstly, though, when you start overwatering any plant is kind of what looks like CalMag problems and nitrogen deficiency and things. Basically, they look like they're kind of choking. So things will curl under a little bit. They'll kind of claw up. The ends of the leaves will kind of yellow out, burn back a little bit. That also confusingly happens when you let things get too dry too. So yeah, it looks everything like a nutrient deficiency, but it isn't. And when you think about what's causing that, it kind of makes sense because soil food web's not happy, roots aren't happy, therefore fertilizer's not being made appropriately or uptaken appropriately, therefore nutrient deficiency. So that's where often with soil, what the plant has, or what the plant wants rather, is there. It just has trouble accessing it. So that's where I've found that focusing on root health really helps a lot. But yeah, in terms of symptoms, that's what you're going to notice early. And visually, you'll kind of know when you're doing that sort of stuff, especially if it's outside. You've really either got to have a soil that just doesn't drain very well, be planted into clay, which, of course has a load of problems, or just be ridiculous with your watering to overwater stuff. Warrigange, autoflower royalty in the house. And Jamie there saying that he likes how the alpha mulch has saponins in it. Yeah, which, I like that about it too. It's a cool mulch. It's obviously not for every circumstance everywhere, but it is a cool stuff. Warrigange is in Canada and watching from there. Been a pest at the local dispensary. That's good. Drive them nuts, dude. Show them what we're made of. They think they know until they meet Aussies. Defier, more royalty. Cool. So yeah, and then there's kind of the thing of cover crops, which I think sometimes gets a bit misconstrued. I've probably said that before, but yeah, my idea of looking at cover crops is something to build your soil. So it's something that I do in between using soil. It's not something that I try and do at the same time as I'm using soil. And that is just from basic common sense on it, that if you have multiple competing things, you either have to have a lot there for everything to access, which if you look at containers is really hard, or it's splitting its resources. So when I look at cover crops, my eventual goal is to turn them into mulch, or to turn them into effectively, green manure compost effectively. And so, yes, things like clover and, buckwheat and all that sort of stuff do fix stuff in the soil, but it's a bit of a misnomer to think that you're getting that fertilizer at the same time that plant is existing. So if you've got, say, clover growing next to your other plant, chances are it's not really sharing much of that nitrogen, but it will, when you dig that clover in at the end, share that nitrogen with the soil. So it's not that it's not fixing it, it's just that it's not much benefit until after that plant is dead, when it is effectively mulch or green manure. So in that regard, outdoors, getting back to mulching and how important it is, you've got to cover your soil with something. So some areas are impractical to mulch. So in that regard, cover cropping, in terms of having a living mulch, makes good sense, because the trade-off between whatever little fertilizer that they're competing with in an open ground situation is, more than balanced by the fact that your soil is covered, more active, and just everything's flourishing that way. Plus, sometimes some IPM benefit, things like that. You try and translate that indoors into pots in a shortish crop window, 12 to 16 weeks. And the technique just doesn't really seem to, in my experience, have proven to be very effective or effective at all. When it does seem to be very effective, though, is after you've re-amended your soil, let it cook for a little while, cover cropping that, and then digging that in before you replant seems to add another layer of benefit that you don't necessarily get just by re-amending. So yeah, maybe boosts certain kind of soil life, causes certain kinds of fermentation. There could be a variety of things going on, but it is effective. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. Some people have a completely different view on it, but I kind of look at that as the plant's kind of reserving their stores, and then we get it back once they decompose, which kind of makes sense. I mean, in nature, it would make sense that the plant is fixing nitrogen for its own purposes, not necessarily to share with everything else. The bud tender told Warrigange that, yeah, he's a good critic. But, I mean, when you produce really good quality yourself, it does make you a pretty stern critic. And especially, Look, I mean, I've had plenty of good dispensary experiences, and they're always normally very nice, very clean. It's a kind of a fun place to go and shop when you're in one of those countries. But by the same token, I've never been really blown away by the quality of everything there, and that's just because it's kind of like fruit and vegetables. The further you get away from the source, the lower the quality is going to inherently be. It's not to say that anyone's doing anything wrong. It's just that shipping, handling, packaging, storage, the need to produce it on time all the time, various different factors that kind of make it not, make a store-bought cake not the same as one that your mum would make or something like that. Ocean's Focus, nice to see you. Look, be the bees with the VPD. It's because indoors you're managing the whole climate, and so outdoors, even on the worst of days, it's still it's hard to explain it, but the conditions aren't as extreme as a bad day in bad conditions inside. Everything's kind of magnified when you've got things that are kind of in a tent like that, or in an indoor setup. So the fact that nature exists is proof that it's kind of all somewhat within the range. Yeah, it gets outside the range, but most of the time it's within the pocket, at least survival for things. It's true in mycology. There's certain mushroom species that will literally just flourish outside in the right conditions, that people have to be ultra sterile and super careful and have hospital clean areas to grow those themselves. So it's just a different thing. Once you remove all of the stuff that keeps nature in balance and you try and just distill that down to a machine that grows plants, it's just a different scenario. That's where, in countries like Australia, where the climate is good, for the most part, most places, people don't really tend to find it that difficult. Good soil, good genetics, so on and so forth. Dank, a warning there from Dank Panda. Cool, always good for recommendations. Nice to see you, Big Papa. Yeah, so a little bit there, some thoughts that could be useful in this sort of weather. Yeah, I agree. If you tried to replicate, the same conditions as a really hot day outside, inside, they would just fry. But that's because it isn't inside. So there's a whole lot of other factors that are going on that just keep nature always more in balance than what an indoor rig could ever be, or more that it could get wildly outside the range of. So the condition, just for the same reason that everything's amplified and grows faster and all the rest of it indoors, is the exact same reason that it's not the same. The conditions are amplified in that environment. Grow Green Daddy, nice to see you. And Green and Mason. King's Evil. Got a few of the other ones on there. So yeah, some new members over in the Discord too, which has been cool. Oh yeah, and thanks to people who picked up plant packs through the week and all the rest of it. That's been cool to see. So we've sold a few of those to some people now. Some people are going to grow some plant. Yep. Alrighty, so I'll try and find something else. Oh, some people have been trying the pre-activation of the top dressings. So I noticed that Otto put up some pretty cool stories on his Instagram, like showing the full process. And his stuff overnight had already started to develop some pretty cool microbes, or obvious growth of microbes, mycelium and all the rest of it. So that was great. And other people saying that they've kind of made it, applied it, and seen an obvious benefit in the plants. So yeah, that's cool. Keep sending photos and all the rest of it like that, or putting them on the grow logs on the Discord. One there from King's Evil. Might need some clarification there, mate. Some people did have some further questions on foliar feeding as well. I've seen that kind of when you get droplets that form on things, they almost look like sort of resin droplets sometimes on really well-grown plants. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's a bad thing. And yeah, nice to hear. Grow Green Daddy's done a full reset, so and I think he's going to be employing some sub-irrigated planters on the next round. So just from the results we've been seeing, it's hard not to recommend that method to a lot of people. If you're going to keep saying it, probably to the point of annoyance, but if you have trouble with watering or you're busy and you just don't want to have to think about that, a well-designed sub-irrigated planter is almost the most ideal way to do it. There's trials going on right now where we're comparing sub-irrigated planters to fabric pots, and it's just kind of like, yeah, the one's pulling away from the other ones at a fairly alarming rate. So it makes, the fact that it's plant driven makes life pretty easy, and more people are discovering the benefits of that. Be the bees. Yes, there is. There's home tests that you can do on the microbes in your soil, and then there's further analysis that they can do on those to see what the balance is. So between, it'll basically just tell you CROB, and then you can determine from that how much of that is made up of bacteria and various other things. Our soil tests routinely extremely high in microbes, but that is batch testing. So when they analyze it, it's got a huge amount of active microbes in there, particularly fungi. But our way of looking at it is you start with an enormous amount of colony, and then by the time it's bagged and shipped and gotten to a customer at the end of it, which puts a lot of pressure on that sort of life, you still should have more than enough to make a healthy and functioning soil. That's kind of the realities of trying to produce something that's biological like that and kind of get it out there everywhere, rather than starting at a low level and kind of watching that get lower and then trying to bounce it back, start at a really high level, is our way of looking at it. Exotic Alchemy, nice to see you. And yeah, a few people have seen the sap leakage thing. Yeah, it's not something I'd be ridiculously alarmed about, but I have seen it. Maddie? And yeah, as Mason says there, so unless there's an injury to the plant where it's obvious that it's losing sap from there, you're probably fine. It's probably just something that's going on. If you've got, like if they're really praying hard and you've got a lot of negative pressure in your tent, that can be a little bit of a cause of it. Some people are running the sub-irrigated planters with Island Blend. And what I would say is that it's really, like that blend goes really well that way because it wicks water really well. The grow dirts, they wick water perfectly fine as well. But just cocoa media, it just soaks it up, right? The part of it that kind of sucks a little bit is that because with sub-irrigated planters, they're predominantly getting their moisture from the res, and it makes it difficult to kind of put fertilizers in the res if you want to keep that healthy. So stuff that runs through the soil and ends up in the res doesn't seem to be on the same level as if you just like tipped aquamarine into the res. The one thing that we've been experimenting with is we're trying antimatter versus lacto in the res. So, both like lacto, obviously, anaerobic bacteria, all of the stuff that comes along with that, and antimatter being an enzyme product with a bunch of different fungi and bacteria in there. So far, I'm seeing the better results from the antimatter, so seeing really healthy roots right down in the sort of drop-down port into the res. But, the lacto plant's doing fine too in terms of it looks healthy. It just doesn't have that like ridiculous white, fluffy, kind of like long tendrils of roots hanging down. But so that makes feeding the island blend a little bit more of a challenge, because yes, you can top dress it, but I feel like the light soil works better with a combination of top dressings and a bit of the solubles, whereas the island blend just thrives on the solubles, and it will work with top dressings, but it really thrives on those. So I almost recommend the light soil more for sub-irrigated stuff like that, because it's quite similar, even though it's a peat-based soil. And the island blend for, say, your mix up water through kind of style, which is, run to drain or run to waste, or really with soil, you're not watering to run off. So it's just kind of like, I just call it mix and go. So you just sort of mix water, that style. The island blend is kind of perfect for that, if that makes any sense. And when I say lacto, I mean like, KNF lacto serum. We make that, we use that in the soils when we're making stuff. So yeah, it's being an anaerobic, a collection of anaerobic organisms normally, but anaerobic, it thrives in low oxygen or no oxygen environments. So yeah, that's where it's of benefit in something like the res of a sub-irrigated planter, because there's nothing really aerating it there. I had a lot of concerns about that initially, but what I've observed is like there's no sulfurous smells or anything that would indicate that there's like, really horrible breakdown going on. If anything, it just all smells like really nice soil. So yeah, I haven't noticed anything like that yet, but just on a recommendation from a friend, I've been running some stuff to kind of just help kind of break down anything that could be in there. And that's the idea of the antimatter, was just to basically any proteins or anything that's kind of in there that could potentially lead to just like bad biofilm, adding that in there to try and just like mop a lot of that up, or even make it useful. Jesse Cross, nice to see you. Yeah, so there's different styles that suit different techniques. You can still have a really low maintenance grow with the island blend. What I would say would be, if you're going the mix and go, and you need low maintenance, just size your pots a little bit bigger and flip a little bit earlier. Or in the case of autos, just kind of not ridiculously oversize them, but maybe go up a couple of gal, 2 or 3 gal. It gives you a little bit more buffer there, so that you're not sort of like stressing about watering all the time if you miss a day because you're busy. It's not the death of things, they're just kind of a little bit low maybe, or lower than you'd like. And it kind of, as a blend, seems to function and tolerate that a lot better than what the grow dirts do. I really like to try and keep those at just an even keel. So not overwatering them, but definitely not letting them get dry either. Just, yeah, it's shown the best performance if it's kept evenly moist. And yeah, the most surprising thing for a lot of people, I think, is when you're using those style of planters and something like the full spec, is just how much legs you can sort of get out of the soil. Again, like testing's shown ours is really high, which anyone that's used it wouldn't be too surprised about. So yeah, some people are running a full crop of photos and then chucking autos in it at the end and getting another run of autos out of it before even re-amending, which to me is just crazy. But I mean, we see the photos, so it's, yeah. I think some of that too is, if you're in that style, you're not really washing anything out or washing anything through. And while your organic amendments and things aren't water soluble so much, yeah, some of them are like, washed away through weathering, so continual applications of water. But yeah, I mean, it's harder to leach all of that out of a soil, so to speak, or kind of flush it out, than it would be if you were like running, say, a salt-based or mineral-based thing. What can you do to boost the microbe life after you've had, a lot of rain? So, applications of good microbes. You're obviously not going to, I wouldn't recommend brewing up a compost tea to then go and apply to stuff after you've just had deluges of rain. Applying some compost maybe. But probably what I would do would be apply something like dark matter. That's normally my first go-to if I think there's been any nuke event of any of the soil life. I'll go to that product because I know that it's got a huge swathe of things that'll suit a wide variety of things in a wide variety of circumstances. So it's a kind of throw a lot of things against the wall and see which ones stick sort of a product. Something else I'll do is if the rain is ongoing and things are suffering through that, I will definitely find a way to get antimatter into the soil. Just continual experience has shown that you can keep the plants a lot healthier by growing, by using antimatter in those sort of circumstances. It seems to just have the effect of warding off pathogens. So if it's going to go on for a week, 10 days, some of the rain events we've been getting have been going on for a month. It gets things through, and then on the tail end of that, I'll reapply dark matter. But even compost is going to have good microbes in it, applying some of that. Things like your IMO collections from K&F, good to get those back in there again. Things like your lacto, that's something you can apply when your soil is potentially more anaerobic, and will also keep your roots healthy, and combinations of all of those things. And yeah, if your whole backyard's underwater, that's probably going to make it like a little bit hard because they're growing in no oxygen, kind of like, or really, really, really low. So you just kind of got to do the best you can with that. Some tough things will survive. If they do, those are probably good genetics, or at least good genetics for your area. I probably missed a couple of questions because every so often I touch the phone wrong and it swaps to something else. So apologies. Nice one, Gary. Nice to see you. Rich, Damo, and Charlie. There's a bunch of cool people on. So yeah, but definitely don't try and water more. Let the soil dry back a little bit. Let some oxygen and stuff get back in there again. If it smells at all sour, yeah, don't add to that situation. You've kind of spoken about it before, but stop hitting yourself. So foliar, some people were asking me some more questions about that. We can talk a little bit more about foliar if you'd like. So yeah, to summarize last time, I mostly foliar through veg. I mostly foliar once a week. You can go twice. I mostly use Green Supreme. If I'm going to go twice, then the other one will probably be something like Aquamarine with a tiny bit of Ocean Potion put in there. So you're kind of getting some different kinds of foliar, aminos, and trace minerals and all the rest of it. But typically it's once a week, a good application with 1 gram per litre of Green Supreme. And yeah, I just kind of find that it has a mild IPM effect from the saponins, just rinsing the plant off under the leaves, and just boosts the health of the plant. The most that I'll continue that into flowering though is about week 2. So yeah, cut it out before things start to develop too far, so that you're not, putting a bunch of stuff on your blooms. Targeted, yeah. So inducing stress in plants to kind of heighten certain amounts of genetic expression. So yeah, definitely when you know a variety really well. So what I would say to people is don't try and do everything the first run. A lot of these tips from people are people that have run the same cut many, many, many times for even years on end. And so that's how they've kind of worked out that that particular technique on that particular cultivar induces that sort of response. Whether it be they drop the temperatures down to bring out purple, whether it be they boost certain fertilizer levels to kind of, induce a certain response in the plant. If you tried that on a separate cultivar, it wouldn't necessarily work the same. So don't overcomplicate it. Just try and keep your plants healthy. A healthy plant's a happy plant, and a happy plant is going to yield and produce well. No real need to overthink it more than that. There's not some like magical trick that's going to, that's going to sort of like make it that if you hadn't simply just focused on plant health, that you wouldn't have got something awesome at the end. So just focus on plant health, grow healthy plants. And then once you have grown that once and say you want to keep it around, then you can start experimenting with some other techniques. So say if you've got something that's got genetics that would preclude you to think that it would do well with, say, a bit more heat or a bit more dry, or you've got something where it would do better with a bit more humidity or a bit more wet, or different daylight hours, that sort of stuff. So stress can bring out interesting qualities in certain plants, and sometimes that stress is actually kind of the crucial thing to getting that perfect expression. But yeah, it's kind of hard to just go, okay, it's from that area, so I'm going to try and emulate that area the first time running it. You could just be setting yourself up for like a whole bunch of problems. Yeah, most things grow well within similar parameters. So just, do that at least first and then experiment later. Less is more. And not necessarily be the bees, but, like when you, there's a little bit of, plus, there's people that have shown me stuff that know stuff too. But yeah, always keep it simple. Like that's the whole reason necessarily to get into organics anyway. And it might seem complicated because there's a whole lot of stuff going on. But once the penny drops, you realize that the intelligence of the soil is kind of doing most of it anyway. And anything else you're doing is either just sort of synergizing with that, or sometimes certain things you're not really adding very much. So yeah, it kind of seems complicated, but it's not. The other way of doing stuff is trying to make it complicated when it doesn't need to be. Frosty Green Trees, hella good to see you. And yeah, Rhino there, echoing that less is more. So yeah, and there's varieties that, like DJ Short was a fairly early proponent of this, but not running 12-12. For a lot of varieties, especially hybrids, it's not the ideal day length or scheduling. You don't get good quality blooms out of it. Conversely, there are varieties that absolutely love it and don't really necessarily like running less than that, or even sometimes like a little bit more than that, controversially. So yeah, there's scope. So yeah, but I still would say, like I normally like either 12-12 until something indicates that maybe not be working for it. So if by like week 4, it's starting to look a little bit ridiculous, like it's starting to maybe foxtail out a little bit and look like, okay, it's wanting to just kind of get what I call stuck in that phase. And plants can get stuck in a variety of phases. Like, another time they get stuck is if you have stuff that's not adapted, you plant it and it grows sort of through the lengthening part of our spring, and then it kind of, crests off and it starts to lower back down from below 14. They'll get stuck in like some weird re-veg phase. A similar thing can happen in flower with certain cultivars where on 12-12, they'll just kind of get hung up on the building phase, and they just keep building and building and building and building forever, and it just doesn't produce a good result. They never seem to ripen. So those ones are a good example of running less. You might drop your daylight hours down to 11. You might even eventually drop them down to 10. So yeah, running less light hours, which more darkness then seems to, in some of those, speed up the ripening and actually get like not just ridiculous amounts of tailing on the end of them, and they'll actually finish out. And then, yeah, there's other times where if you try and do that with a certain variety, it'll basically just finish almost instantaneously, and not in necessarily a good way. It just kind of cuts the building phase right off. It's sort of, maybe it could be that it senses that it's winter or some kind of extreme thing that normally would be accompanied by frost. And so it just sort of seems to turn off. But yeah, that's a kind of not necessarily a beginner kind of thing. A lot of people are running varieties these days that have been bred and do perfectly fine on 12-12. So run that for most people. But, you know, when you're getting into trying to perfect that cultivar, for something like blueberry, for instance, it just does not express the same if you grow it on 12-12 as when you grow it on 11-13. You get a vastly different plant in a really positive way. And there's plenty of ones out there that are like that. The dropping the temps thing is, yeah, it's kind of cheating in a way. Because, you know, you can make anything purple out if you just kind of do that. You know, it kind of induces a lot of things in the plant. That, yeah, it's kind of, so you're artificially inducing that purple. It's not really a purple. For people in countries that have rec markets where, you know, if it's not colourful and showy, it earns less or sells lower. You know, maybe that's of great importance. I know that a lot of people really try and make it sort of look as colourful and stuff bag appeal wise as possible. But yeah, I always kind of looked at it as like stunting it a little bit. While you do get the purpling, things do just kind of in really, especially in soil. Once it gets that cold, the soil just kind of turns off. So yeah, people do it on salt grows a lot. It's kind of a little bit easier. You just kind of run your root temps a little bit warmer, I guess. And they're getting nitrates, so it's kind of hard not to absorb those, but they probably just run higher EC. But the same thing doesn't necessarily work in soil. The best way to get good purple plants in soil is just to grow plants that turn purple naturally. And a lot of people notice once they drop from you, like they've grown the same cutting multiple times, many times even, but they've always grown it on a bottle range, and then they grow it in the soil, and it shows wild colors that they've never seen before, and not deficient colors, just like it's not overloaded with nitrates all the time. So it's not that artificial plastic green. It's kind of just a natural, nice green. And all of the other colors seem to be able to shine through a lot better than that. I also think that there's things going on in the soil that promote that. So the interaction with the food web could potentially be increasing things like that. They've shown that that's the case with vegetables. So it makes sense that it would be the same with that plant, even if there's not a direct correlational study. And yeah, so Defier, they're probably explaining it a bit better than me. So he puts it down to the daily light interval. So how much light that plant likes in a certain window, pretty much. Yeah, and if you're going to get purple, you're going to get purple. Some things are just naturally purple. It doesn't matter the temperatures. Like you don't need to have cold. They'll do it in 40-degree heat, perfectly happy. It's just their expression is that purple. And then there's other things where it's more of an environmentally induced thing. But I mean, most stuff will purple out if it's in extreme cold. And if you're running your air conditioners really far down, especially in the night cycle, it's kind of an artificial environment. It does make things look pretty though. And Mason there, yeah, he did. He got some really nice colors on autos, purples and pinks and reds and all that sort of stuff. And that was on a 20 hours on, 4 hours off light cycle. Yield was pretty astronomical on that too. Quality was through the roof. I believe they were Moscas that he had in that. Sub-irrigated planter with full spec dirt. So yeah, did really, really, really well. Yeah, and yeah, that's one there too. Putting ice around your plants, like getting a bag of crushed ice and kind of putting that around your plants to drop the root temperatures way down, like it's been through a freeze. It's just all stuff that's just mythology, really. It's the same as putting razor blades in your stems sideways, or hitting stuff with sticks. Like, there's heaps of things. And like I've said before, I'm sure they probably work for that person with that particular cultivar in their particular region, right? So when you try and port that out and say that that's good advice for everyone to use, I don't necessarily think, sorry, my eye's still itchy. It's the one that had the unfortunate incident last week. I don't necessarily think telling people to put ice around their plants is a way to guarantee quality. Like I said before, just keeping it simple and just kind of growing healthy plants, you'll get nice, healthy stuff. Mason's one was actually a perfect example of that, because they were just booming, really healthy plants, and the quality from that was amazing. No cold flush needed, or any extreme events. Just pure old-fashioned healthy garden. But the grow science is real. Just as there's bro science in gyms, there's grow science in the grow scene. And I'm partial to a bit of it myself. Like, don't get me wrong. There's certain stuff that I'm like sentimental about or have just theories about. So yeah, everything with a grain of salt. But there's some things that just logically don't seem to make a lot of sense, right? So especially in soil, like if you got soil and your soil likes stability and you're doing all this stuff that's really extreme to it, it's probably not going to like that. And then because you've got a soil plant relationship, your plant's not going to like the fact that your soil is not liking what you're doing. So then that's going to result in an unhappy, unhealthy garden. So a lot of those techniques just kind of go out the window once you kind of swap into organics and you realize that, you just kind of, your job is to keep the soil healthy and functioning well and giving the plant everything it wants. And then you get kind of plants as a byproduct of that. It's less about doing these kind of sometimes strange and weird things that certainly don't scale well. I mean, you would never see a commercial farm that's kind of like, like just doing that. It would be crazy. Not to say everything commercial farms do is ideal either. If you've ever seen the quality of stuff that you buy from them, it's by and large not very good. I did it again. I touched the wrong button on the phone, and so it went sideways. So I just lost a bunch of comments. Do it well. I got one there from Be the Bees, but it just says no bro but, and then I don't know what it's alluding to because I lost the rest of the stream. So maybe he can clarify. But yeah, so you can try a variety of different things. What I suggest to people is, if you do want to try weird stuff or extreme techniques, just pick a clone. Make sure it's a variety you've tried before. Pick a clone and experiment with that clone. In fact, pick the healthiest one. Really, if you want to slate the odds in your favor, pick the healthiest one. But what you'll probably find, and this is certainly what I've found over the time, is when you try these things, the mythology around them kind of fades out pretty quickly once you realize what you're doing. So like, as you're manipulating the stem in some really weird and extreme way, or as you're putting the bag of ice around the plants, you kind of realize that, what the hell am I doing? And then the results from that kind of flow forth. By the same token, we do live in a time now where the particular plant that we're so interested in has, at least at this point in history, probably not been more widely studied. As much as they say there's not a lot of scientific data on it, like there's a whole lot of people doing a whole lot of studies in a whole lot of places with a whole lot of people, not just rodents and rats and things like we seem to be mucking around with anymore. And they're finding things out from that. And then there's also, real world anecdotal stuff where people are trying things it's not just one or two that someone has, this is, say, a facility or something like that where they're trying something and, documenting it and achieving a certain level from that, seemingly. So, yeah, there is some good science, and then there's some stuff that's kind of not so good, and then there's just some stuff that's like hangover from Prohibition era where everybody got their advice from the person who best knew how to talk about it at the pub or something close like that. Shout outs to homegrown vegetables too. So the HPO potatoes finished off, and it's almost like there's more dirt than potato in the bags. Like and they're so tasty. They're really, really, really tasty. So like I'm gonna get some photos. I'll pull all the potato out and see just how much. I think I've eaten 5 potatoes. So I, +5 to whatever I get out of there. But yeah, it was cool and fun. In the end, these kind of lady beetle kind of came in and just ate all the foliage. There was nothing I could do, so I just thought, oh, I can just have that. But they'd done enough to where, yeah, it looks like I'm gonna harvest probably like $5 worth of potatoes, but they're really, really tasty ones. Grey Green Daddy, the ultimate stress tester. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, of course, there's YouTube science as well. Our things go up onto YouTube now, so we're contributing to that whole, universe. Yeah, so plenty of opinions on all this sort of stuff. These are just mine. Sugary, nice to see you. I would argue on the subject of stress testing things that people don't stress test things enough. It really sucks to create something or make something and then have to kind of deal with the fact that it might not hack it. That, is kind of brutal. So I can certainly recognize not wanting to stress test things. I mean, if it's going to harm, you might not necessarily want to find out if you've staked a lot of work on it. Yeah, so that's kind of, but at the same time, it's best for everyone to fully vet something as much as possible. So, stress testing things is important, whether it be gear that you're intending to use or whether it be varieties that you're intending to grow. Some stuff that can, at least hack a little bit of stress or some level of adversity is good. Finish the Earl Grey. We're moving on to the water now. Water with 90 plus minerals from the ocean. Wonderful. Someone has a 4.5 litre sip and they're refilling the res twice a day because it's drinking so fast. So actually that's something that we've found is that you'll be surprised once they tap into that res just how much of that stuff they suck up. I think one of the guys is running an 11 litre one and it's probably going through that every 2 or 3 days at the most. So yeah, and it's not completely full in that pot at all. Can you use Green Supreme, Antimatter, Dark Matter, and Rhizo in the res? So far, the testing I've done indicates that Antimatter is definitely very good to use in there. Dark Matter, I would more reserve for when you're watering from the top, which, there's plenty of opportunities, even in a sub-irrigated planter where, you might not be doing a 10 or 15% saturation point watering, but you can certainly, in the case of a microbial inoculant, apply like a 5% watering and get enough of that in there to be of good benefit. So that's probably a better way to apply your Green Supreme, Dark Matter, things like that. Mojo I've experimented with a little bit, chucked some of that in the res, didn't see any adverse results from doing that. But at the same time, the testing on that hasn't been as extensive as what it's been on the antimatter. So it's kind of a your mileage might vary situation. But if the res is getting drained twice a day, it's a little bit of a moot point, because that's kind of getting cleared out and there's really nothing sitting there that long. So I would be personally comfortable recommending antimatter and Mojo. But the dark matter and the green supreme I would more reserve when you're applying something to the top, if you can. Or green supreme by Folia, also shown remarkable synergy in that sort of a grow style. Yeah, there's CRISPR being used within the sort of genetic seam and all the rest of it. There's a lot of tissue culture being done now. It's almost like every facility now is tissue culturing something. How necessarily a lot of that is, and how much it's more of a selling point in terms of, like, you know, we have X, Y, and Z, and so therefore our stuff is X, Y, and Z. People for a long time didn't have that and still produced really good quality plants that didn't necessarily have large amounts of diseases or inherent viruses. So it's possible, and, you know, not every nursery that has big stocks and all the rest of it runs tissue culture. So it's not 100% crucial, but it can be beneficial depending on your setup. And yeah, so that's what I would recommend if you're looking at adding stuff to the sub-irrigated sort of res situation. It's a little bit tricky. So you don't necessarily want to look at it like you've got a hydro res and that you're trying to get the plant to be sucking up nutrients from that all the time. The idea with those sort of planters is that you have a rich mix that's got everything the plant needs in the first place, and that res is there to maintain moisture levels. Even moisture levels means happy soil equals happy plants. And so I really think the major utility and benefit of them seems to be that, like I said, it's plant driven. So you're not relying on, say, a little sensor to determine that the soil's at a particular moisture point, or timing, guessing it, that sort of stuff, or just probing around with a moisture meter, you know, kind of, it's guessing at best. Because like I've said with those meters before, like, you know, there are some that are expensive and they work quite well, but most of the ones that people have access to are just complete rubbish. You might as well just get a stick and just kind of go and just guess, and you'll probably get a better result. So yeah, the utility of those is that the whole thing, plant uses moisture in res, sucks it up, keeps it all within the pocket. And that seems to be what produces those kind of really phenomenal and quick growing results that people are seeing, especially in the full spec. I mean, there's people running light and all sorts of things. Like I think Surfcraft is running light, some top dressings and a bit of stuff like that in his rig, and it looks kind of ridiculous, like how well it's done. But yeah, with the full spec in it, it seems to be like a marriage made in heaven. I would really like to do some trialing on some large ones, you know, say like 250, 500 litre ones in an outdoor setting with the Gorilla mix. I would be interested to see how that performs. It's a very open mix, so it would be how well that deals with kind of all the climate, but my inclination's to think that it would work rather well. Oh, we got the Fab team on. No way. Cool to see you guys. And they've always got loads of information. So yeah, what did we get into? We got into top dress. We got into mulching, cover crops, more stuff on sub-irrigated, and a tiny bit of stuff on foliar. Does anyone have any kind of questions before we go? I'll quickly check the other streams, see if there's anything over there. Hit me up in the little comment thing if you do have anything. But other than that, we might cruise. Might cruise on with my Sunday. I'm trying not get completely cooked in the sun. All right, cool. I think we got them all this week. Well, if you do have anything else, hit us up on Discord, email, direct message, all that sort of stuff. We're normally pretty available. But other than that, thanks for tuning in, and I hope you all have a terrific Sunday. Bye for now. Now I'll awkwardly